Alright guys, in today's video we're going to be working on this GMT900 body style. This is a 2013 Chevrolet Avalanche LT, and the rear disc brakes have got a squealing sound, and that's that kind of distinctive sound that you know is because the wear indicator's going. So what we're going to be doing in today's video is just a complete rear disc brake job on this body style truck with all OEM parts, and I'll give you all the genuine GM part numbers. And to get this guy off, we're just going to start with pulling off this little beauty cover here, and then underneath we'll be able to see that there are some 22 millimeter lug nuts. We'll zip those off with an impact wrench. We'll get this wheel off, and then we'll get started on pulling the caliper. All right. So what we've got on here are rear rotors for disc brakes and a built-in integral drum because the parking brakes are in the back here have shoes. And so we're going to first pull off the caliper. I'll do this job, then I'll take you through this GM service manual and show you all the documented way of doing this, but we're just going to go ahead and get started hitting it first. So let me go ahead and get these caliper bolts out. Alright, before we start removing any fasteners, let me show you what was making that noise. It's really obvious if you come back around on this side. I get it where we don't have too much glare. There we go. And then right down here where the pick is, you can see the wear indicator. Let's get this light just right there. So you can see the wear indicator is rubbing on the rotor as it's supposed to. And this is just letting us know that these pads need to be replaced now. So let's go ahead and get this caliper off. That's held in by a 13 in the back here. See if we can get some light on the subject. 13 in the back here, and then this guy here that we're going to hold on the pin is a 20. Now I'm going to show you the way GM would show you this when we look at the service manual, and what they're going to show is taking just one of these off on the bottom and flipping this up, mostly because these 13 millimeter bolts have to be replaced and can't be reused. So what they recommend doing if you're just replacing the pads, and we're going to replace more than the pads, but I'm just going to come down here and do this bottom one first to show you that technique. Just going to release the torque on this with a breaker bar. It's got some corrosion on it there. All right, let's see if we can zip it off. Alright, so what they would suggest you do, take off this one and then rotate this whole assembly up. Might have to get a pry bar to do that, but let me go ahead and show you that. And they would just say, rotate this up, service the pads, rotate it back down, put a new one of these bolts, and that's how you do a pad swap only. Now we're going to go ahead and pull the rotor, so I'm just going to get us something to pry this up with to show you that technique, and then we'll go ahead, take this other one off and remove the rotor. Alright, let's rotate the caliper up away from the caliper bracket using a pry bar. Alright, that's all GM would have suggested you do here to service the pads. And then you could have taken this guy, secured him with something like this bungee, something like that. You can get him out of the way, service the pads, bring it back down, and then replace this one bolt. So when we go and do the service manual review, I'll show you all that. But for what we're doing, we're going to go ahead and pull this other bolt and go ahead and remove the caliper altogether. All right, now we're going to have to go on the back here and pull the bolts here and here that are holding this caliper bracket onto the backing plate area so that we can get the rotor off. All right, guys, we're going to come in here with an 18 millimeter. I don't have a good access with my impact wrench, so we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. All right, so you guys get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and work these both off that way. All right, so we got the pad bracket out of there. Now we can get a close look at these pads. So yeah, these guys are really worn down. There's our wear indicator. So definitely time for new pads. So we will go ahead and set this aside because we're going to be doing the full enchilada here. So now we want to get this rotor off. These little press-on clips that you see here, you don't typically see these. These are put on by the factory during the manufacturing process to prevent this rotor from falling off when the chassis is moving down the assembly line. And usually when they get serviced outside of a GM dealership, they get discarded. The fact these are still on here kind of tells me that this was serviced at the dealership most of its life. So we will try to get these off without damaging them. You get them started, they'll just unscrew, just like a nut. But you don't have to keep them on here. I mean, like I said, they were only used in the initial manufacturing. When we look at the service manual, it does mention these. And it just talks about the need to remove them if they're present. It doesn't tell you that you have to keep them here. So this is going to take a little bit of time to wind this guy off. So I'll go ahead and pull both of these off, and then we'll come back. All right, guys, what I found was the nicest tool to work these off without damaging them was just a pry bar. Same pry bar we used to pull the caliper up. Gets them off without damaging them, if that's important to you. All right, so now we should be able to remove this rotor drum assembly. Set this right here. So we don't have any scoring or anything on the rotor. So technically might be able to reuse it. It certainly should be turned though first. Now what we're doing is we're trying to get a look at these parking brake shoes to see if we need to do anything with those. So they have not become delaminated and they still have a lot of material left. So these guys can stay and we can just replace our rotor. Now I want to say something before about when we were trying to work these 18 millimeters off the old-fashioned way. You notice I'm using a brass hammer, and the brass won't hurt the chrome. It's very soft, but it's heavy. It's like a 2-3 pound hammer. It's enough to break the torque on the fastener the manual way when you can't get an impact wrench in there. All right, so at this point what we're going to do is we're going to clean up this brake dust. We're going to clean up the back side of this here. There's not a whole lot of corrosion, just some surface corrosion. Won't have to do much to get this ready. And then we're going to put a new rotor on here. What I like to do is, if the old rotor is still serviceable, if you're going to spend money for GM parts, then you can take the old rotor to a machine shop. They can turn it. You can put a new one on. You can hold on to the turned one, and then the next time you have to do the service, you can swap them. And you can kind of repeat that process a couple of times. So let's get this cleaned up. We'll come back and we'll put some new gear on here. All right, we brake cleaned off these parking brake shoes so that we got a better look at them. When you're trying to evaluate whether these guys are okay or not, don't forget to look on the bottoms. So we can take a mirror down here and we can see the condition of the bottom. We got all this crud brake cleaned off so that everything is in good shape, and then we can see our adjuster very clearly if we have to adjust the drag with the new rotor. So before I go clean off this front piece, I want to get this new rotor over here. This is going to be a, let's move this brake clean stuff out of the way. It's going to be a GM2296 8231 or an AC Delco 177 1149. Basically look just like the one we took off, except that it's going to be pre-painted. Now you'll be able to tell if it's a GM one. It'll have like this 02042K2977 type of casting number, and then it'll have the maximum distance, maximum diameter for the machine shop to understand what to turn. This is the maximum drum diameter for the parking brake, and then this one over here is the maximum disc rotor thickness. Again, this is all information for the machine shop. So we'll take some brake clean and we'll clean off the inside rotor and we'll clean off the outside, and then we'll get it test mounted. All right, guys, that other number I showed you that I had in stock is actually a discontinued number. I don't want to show you something you can't order. This is the current number, 1917-6756 from GM, or an AC Delco 18A2332. You know, same kind of hat-type rotor with an integral drum for the parking brake, but instead of being coated all the way around like the original OEM type from the manufacturing line, this type is only coated on the hat part and the edge of the fins. The actual rotor surface and the actual drum surface is unfinished. So this is what we'll be using going forward, since that other number has been discontinued. All right, guys, I figured I would show you on the driver's side this parking brake assembly in a little bit more detail, because on this side it's up here and easier to film. On the passenger side it's near the bottom, like you saw. So the adjuster is a standard star wheel like you'd see on any other GM drum brake, except you got to manually adjust it. You shouldn't have to do it very often, but when you do, you have to manually adjust it. And you can use a spoon or any other tool to come in here and either move this clicker down one or move it up one, like that. And then coming probably for this side, it'll be a little easier to go in the other direction. And the thing you hear clicking back there, hopefully you can hear clicking, it's not too loud, is this little guy here, this little clip. Let's get some light on there. If we zoom in without any glare from the light, so this little clip here, right on the back side, let me see if I can get the light right there. Yeah, this is like a little detent clip to keep this thing from moving. That's why there's resistance to you moving it in either direction. But anyway, this is the wheel that you'll turn to either move these shoes out or bring them back in to get the check for the drag clearance when you put the rotor on. Make sure the transmission is in neutral so that you can turn the wheel And also, of course, you want to make sure the parking brake is off. All right, now what if you forget to do this and you put the wheel back on and you're like, oh, I forgot to adjust this. There is a way on these GM models to access it from behind. It's not as easy as what we're doing right now, but it can be done. Let me see if I can show it to you on this mirror. Maybe we can zoom in on what the mirror sees. I'll get this thing situated. So there's the little boot for the parking brake cable and the actuator that goes through that kind of dusty black boot. And then right underneath it is this thing. It looks like an upside down bleeder valve cover. And you can actually pop that off. I'm going to have to remove the flashlight for a second. Reach down here and just like pop that guy off. Okay. Let's see if I can get your view back. Right, and with that guy popped off, yeah, this is not a really good view. Let me go get a remote camera, guys, so you can see what I'm talking about here, and we'll redo this shot. All right, so I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to snake it back here. And if you guys look at the camera down on the ground, if I can get this thing oriented right, right there. So that's the hole that's covered up by that little dust boot. And if I can get this at the right angle, I suspect you can see the little star wheel in there. Come on. Come on, come on, come on. There. So now you can see the teeth of the wheel in that little hole. See them? So if you can get a appropriately sized tool through this little hole, you'll be able to adjust the wheel after the fact as well. All right, guys, what I normally do at the parking brake, if it's all GM's parts, usually you don't have to do much of an adjustment. We're just going to get this guy on here, and we'll run one of the lug nuts down on the bottom and on the top. Just hand tight. I want to make sure we can turn this guy. So that tells us the parking brake is released. And we're just really listening, just like old school drum brakes, if you've got any strong drag. Don't hear much at all. And then what we'll go ahead and do is we'll go inside, we'll activate the parking brake, and then we'll make sure that we cannot turn this anymore with a pry bar. Now that's a quick and dirty check. If you want to do the thorough check, you need to have a special tool that measures the inside diameter of the rotor and the outside diameter of the shoes and allows you to dial it in exactly. But I've used this technique I'm showing you here for decades, and it's fine. Let me go ahead and go inside and put the parking brake on and recheck this. All right, what I usually do is put a couple more lug nuts into position so that we don't damage the threads with the pry bar. Get them on the flats, and then I get on here and pull it down as hard as I can and make sure it doesn't budge at all. All right, and that tells me that we've got good engagement. Now what we got to go check real quick is, do we have too much engagement? So let's go back in and release the parking brake. All right, and then let's check what the contact surface looks like inside the rotor, just from that one attempt to make it move with the pry bar. So we should see some witness marks from the shoes, and we do. Especially when you got a brand new rotor like this, it's really easy to see, right? So we could see where the shoes were scraping here on the inside. So we've got good contact all the way around where the shoes were hitting. And if we put this back on here one last time, I'm just going to do it without the I guess I won't do it without the lug nuts, because then somebody will put down in the comments, you didn't put the lug nuts on there. So we'll go ahead and put these back on. All this is doing in this part of the test is keeping the rotor seated fully on the shoes. And it's probably a good idea to do this, right? Because you don't want to get it cocked and damage the shoe lining material, especially since we don't want to go replacing these. I'll show you the part number for the shoes if you end up having to replace yours. And I'm just basically feeling what the drag is like and listening to what the drag is like. Yeah, it feels fine to me. I think we're good to go. So I'm going to pull this back off, and then we're going to resurface that facing material, and then we'll get this guy mounted, and we'll move our attention onto the caliper bracket pins and the caliper bracket pads. All right. If you did end up having to need to adjust those shoes, you could do that with the adjuster on the bottom, star adjuster, just like any drum brake system. All right, I said if you did have problems with your parking brake shoes that I would show you the number for the shoe kit for that. It's a GM 1581 7020 or an AC Delco 171 0992. I'll go ahead and open this up for you guys just to show you what you get in the package. Basically, it's just that outer shoe assembly, just like we saw. And then this little bracket piece. Maybe you call it a clip retainer piece. And then a couple of bolts that have got red Loctite pre-applied to them. So that's what comes in a GM parking brake shoe kit. Those are the only three things that you need to replace if you end up having to replace the shoes. And you can see the thickness on these, right? Ours are almost exactly the same as these brand new ones. That's why we didn't change them out. All right, pads, and then we're done. So our rotor's in place. Let's go take a look at what we got to do on the bracket. So now on the caliper bracket, bring this over here. Take this pad out. Take this pad out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take these spring clips out. On both sides, and then we're going to get in here with a wire brush, and we're going to clean this up inside of any corrosion, and then we're going to put new clips in here. And our pad kit looks like this. It's a GM 1932 9677, an AC Delco 171 0999. And what's in here are, you got two pads for each side, inner and an outer. And then you've got 4 of those spring clips, and you've only got 2 bolts. So how come there's only 2 bolts? Remember, like I showed you in the beginning, GM expects you to just leave one of these bolts on and only remove one and flip the caliper up, change the pads, flip it back down, and replace the one bolt. So if you're going to do what I'm doing, you're going to have to buy some extras of these bolts, which I've done, and I'll put the part number for the bolts individually down in the video description. All right, guys, a real quick shot of the service manual here. So for rear disc brake pad replacement, Check your fluid level, because when you go compress the caliper, if you got too much in there, it may overflow. So they're telling you to check that before you get started. Take some out if you need to. Jack and raise the vehicle, pull off the wheel, compress the caliper piston. You can use a C-clamp to do that. They make an important note here not to use any air tools. This would also include electric impact wrenches to remove these 13mm bolts. Too much of a chance you might break it off. Use hand tools only. Put a 20mm open-end wrench to hold the caliper guide pin, and then you can pull the 13 off with that holding it on straight. Go ahead and remove that bolt. They tell you to remove number 1 here, right? And support the caliper so that it doesn't get damaged, the hose going into it rather. And then they tell you, like I mentioned, rotate the brake caliper up until it stops on the bracket, and support the caliper with wire equivalent, bungee cord, whatever you want to do there. If you're using the original one, they tell you it's important to mark the position. This is to avoid getting unusual noises or vibrations introduced. If you put it back in a different spot, that's a possibility. Remove the pads and springs. Thoroughly clean the mating surfaces on the bracket of any corrosion or debris. Make sure you let it dry. Same thing if you're doing new ones or old ones. And then on the installation procedure, thin coating of high temperature brake lube where the pads made up on the bracket surfaces. Install your new spring clips. Install your new pads. Remove the adhesive backing paper from the disc brake pad insulator. It's going to make contact with the caliper piston. Install the brake pads. Remove the whatever you had to retain the caliper, and install a new caliper guide pin bolt. So the only reason the kit only includes one for each side is because they want you to do this flip up deal. But if you end up taking both out like I did, you got to replace them both. The point is, new caliper guide pin bolts have to be used on the rear brakes. You won't see that note on the front, but it does have to be done on the rear. And then again, reminder about not using any air tools. Same thing for an impact wrench on electric, right? Tighten this 13 up to 28 foot-pounds. Right, so no anti-seize, no Loctite. Just put the bolt in naked, 28 foot-pounds for that 13, and then pull everything. Lower your vehicle. Go ahead and check it out. That was for just the pads. Now the rotors. So for the rear brake rotor replacement, 1500 series. They want you to check the fluid level in the master cylinder, because you're going to have to compress the caliper as part of getting that off or replacing the pads, releasing the parking brake, jacking and supporting the vehicle, getting the wheel off, compressing the caliper piston with a C-clamp, removing the C-clamp, and then removing the caliper bracket mounting bolts, and removing the caliper and supporting it to the side, which we've already done in the previous clip. Here they talk about if you're going to reinstall the rotor, they want you to mark the relationship to the hub. This can help avoid spurious noises and vibrations. So just, use a paint mark and put it back on with the same orientation of the lug nuts as it came off with. Adjust the parking brake so the adjuster's fully seated. Here they mention these two little copper push nuts from the brake rotor. They want you to put some penetrating oil on the studs. This is in a climate where you're going to have corrosion. Put the lug nuts on the end using a dead blow hammer. Tapping it between the studs can loosen the rust and get it to come off. And that's all it takes to remove this guy. And then when you install it, they talk about resurfacing the hub from any rust on the flange that's there. We did that. Mounting this guy back on, obviously cleaning any corrosion chemicals that would have been on the drum surface or the rotor surface. If you're using the original rotor, getting it lined back up. In our case, we're using a new one. Reinstall the caliper and bracket. Remove all the adhesive from the bolts, from the original thread locker on the bolts, and then apply new thread locker, GM 1234-5493, to the threads, and torque those two 18mm bolts to 122 foot-pounds. That's why it was so hard to get these guys off in the beginning. Adjusting the parking brake, and they show you that. I'll show you that next on 5-401, and then put the wheels back on and go ahead and test everything's working okay. If we jump back to 401 here, I'll show you the parking brake section. radius. All right, so parking brake adjustment on a 1500 truck. A lot of this has to do with using this special tool I mentioned that measures the inside diameter of the drum portion of the rotor and then the outside diameter of the shoes, and helps you calculate where you need to sit this. You can do it by feel and sound like I did, or you can use this type of tool or something similar, but what you're trying to get it down, if you're going to go that route, is 0.66 millimeters or 0.026 inches. They're suggesting a feeler gauge. You're going to have something that's long and bendable, obviously, to get up under here in between the shoe and the rotor, the drum part of the rotor. As you saw, there's no way to get a regular feeler gauge in here. But if you want to go that route, there's the information. The method I showed you, I've been using for a long time. It works just fine. You can see that the wear on those shoes is just fine. Let's see. Talk about putting the rotor on with the lug nuts. I showed you that. With all tension removed, check for drag, repeat steps 3 to 6 until you don't have excessive drag. And then the rest of this is about the parking brake cables and that sort of thing. So hopefully this helps you out in reference to what I'm showing you. I'm loosely following this in some cases and strictly following it in others. All right, guys, so we've wire wheeled out the mating area for the spring clips, and we're going to put our new ones in. And I don't live in a corrosion area, so I don't normally put anything on the contact surface between the clip and the bracket. But I do, like the service manual says, put it on the inside here. So the next thing we're going to go do is we're going to pull out these pins. And we're just going to clean them off and re-lubricate both of these. And we're going to inspect that these boots are not torn, and they're not. And if they're torn, they come in a pin kit with new pins. I'll put that part number down in the description if you need it. But ours look fine. So we're going to clean these guys up and re-lubricate them. All right, so I'm going to be using this AC Delco high temperature silicone brake lubricant, AC Delco 104019 or GM 8886 2182. This is the same kind of relatively thin consistency material that we saw on here when we pulled it out. That's what the dealers would use. We don't need a whole lot. We just want to get the whole thing coated with it. Now, if we had corrosion or something like that, I would take this boot apart and I would try to get inside there, but we don't. So all I want to do this time is try to get the air out of here. I push down and twist. I want to just make sure that this guy reseats, right? And so that our boot is fully back on this pin. And we're going to do the same thing on this one. Just going to wipe off the old grease. This vehicle's, been well maintained, fortunately, so not in the rust belt, so pretty easy job. I don't want to goober this up, so I'm trying to just have like a medium coat on it. And again, same twisting function because we're trying just to get the air to go out. Basically want to let it burp. This one was fine. This one we got some air trapped in it. So I kind of have to work it around a lot because we don't want it to pop up like that. We want it to be like this guy here and just sit in with just the tension of the lubrication itself. So sometimes you can get it to kind of burp out just by pressing the side of the boot while you push it down. Sometimes it's more difficult. There we go. Got some of it out. Going to give it another push. 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 There we go. So I want all that air out of there. In fact, this one I think I could get a little better. Just want to burp all the air out. All right, we're set. We're ready to put this guy on. Now the part number for the thread locker that's in the service manuals discontinued. It's been replaced by this guy here. It's AC Delco 10 2029 1936 9733. So that's what we're going to apply on our threads. Now we wire wheeled these threads off. Yeah, is there still little bits and pieces? There might be. It's not the end of the world. Hopefully we got enough to do this job here. So I just put it on like that, and then as you turn it, it's going to get where it needs to go. A little bit goes a long way. Okay, we're good to go. Had a little bit of it drop out on our brake pad. All right, so now we're going to get the caliper remounted. Can't get you guys in here, but you guys know the deal. We'll get this remounted and we'll get it torqued down to the value we saw in the service manual. All right, that's part's done. All right, we take a couple of pads out of our pad kit. Here's the adhesive backing that they're talking about. There's going to be two unique types. One's going to have the anti-wear indicator and the other is not. They're going to go on with the arc side lining up in line with the rotor. Now, it doesn't mention in this particular service manual. Typically, the service manual always says to put this wear indicator on the edge where the wheel's turning, so that you would end up putting it either like we found it, and it'd be up on the front, or we'd reach into the pad kit and we'd get the other one. Let's see if maybe they're keyed to only go on one side. I have not done this particular truck before. So no, we could end up putting it on this side or the other side. I don't think it really matters because the service manual didn't say. So you could either have it where it's on this side facing up, or you could have it where it's on this side facing up. And I think we'll just end up doing it the way we found it, with this side facing up. Like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of our lubrication, not a lot because you don't want it running down. Put some on the ear here that will move around with our finger. This is just to kind of cut down on any squeaking. Get the bottom lined up into the spring. Make sure you don't touch the braking surface when you got this stuff on your fingers. And then we'll take the other one, do the same thing. Get some of this lubrication on the ear here. Again, keep it off of the, this way. Keep it off of the surface that's going to be making contact. And then we're going to pull these white pieces of adhesive off, but not until we're ready to put the caliper on. So we're going to take the caliper, and then we're going to depress this guy, and then we're going to get it cleaned up on top here. So that's the next step we're going to go do. So I'm going to go get a depressor to push this in. Again, make sure you check your reservoir. Make sure somebody hasn't added brake fluid thinking that they needed to. It's normal for the brake fluid to go down as components wear. You shouldn't keep topping it off unless it gets too low. And it shouldn't get too low unless you have a leak. So in this case, though, since this is not my truck, and I'm servicing it for somebody else, I'm going to go check that, because when we press this, it's going to push that fluid back down through the system. We don't want it to overflow under the hood. There's a lot of different tools you can use. You know, the service manual mentioned a C-clamp. I like this particular kind of tool here. There's a lot of different ones here, but we're just using this tool to press up against the outer two ears of the caliper, and then one of the old pads to push our piston in. So we're just going to slowly crank this guy down, and while we do this, the fluid's going to work its way back into the master cylinder. So I'll bring you guys back when we get this all done and we clean off these surfaces. Alright, so now let's come in here and let's go grab the backing paper for this adhesive. Get this one off. Come in here on the other side. Get this one off. We've got our piston all the way in. You zoom in on here, we've got this squeaky clean with brake clean. We also inspected the rubber boot that goes around here to make sure there's no damage to it. We watched it when it was fully extended and then as it compressed, so it's not kinking up, anything like that. On the other side, the areas that are going to make contact with our adhesive are nice and clean. There's some small pitting here, can't do anything about that, but it's nothing that's going to be a problem. And then the pads are going to rest right along the top here. Right along the top part here is where I would want to take some more of our AC Delco lubricant, very, very small amount, just to avoid any noise, just on this flat area. Don't get it where the adhesive has to go. Also resist the urge to use something like Goof Off or something like that, because that could make the new adhesive not stick properly. I'm going to bring this guy into position. He's kinked up on the back here. There we go. And then we're going to take our new bolts that were included in our pad kit. They're pre-coated with the right material that they need. Get this one started. Go grab the other one here. And again, I'll put the part number for these individual bolts if you end up doing what I did and you're not doing just the pads. Now you guys are going to be in my way and I'm not going to be able to see where this goes. Maybe do it by feel here. Yep, there we go. Alright, get this started by hand. I think we got it lined up, can't tell. I'm going to have to move you guys out of the way and get down here and see. Alright guys, like I mentioned earlier, here's the part number for these individual 13mm bolts. GM2582 3358. Alright. 28 foot-pounds on this guy. Foot-pounds on this guy. Alright, so we are done. We've got new rotors. We've got our parking brake shoes inspected. We've checked the clearance and drag on the inner drum to the parking brake shoes. We've cleaned up our brand new GM rotor. We've got new GM pads. We've got them in new springs, new orientation. We've cleaned off the surface that's going to make contact with the anti-noise adhesive on this pad. We've checked our master cylinder. We're fine on the fluid. We're checking everything else while we're here. No leaks. We got to make sure that our little bleeder cap is in place. These like to fall off. I'll put a part number for that in the description too in case you're missing one. You'd have to get it with the whole bleeder screw. They don't sell you just the cap. That's neither here nor there. Now what about the paint on here? So you notice this is painted. Well, you want paint on here for corrosion purposes here and here, but it'll wear off the first time you go braking, and you'll be able to peer through the wheel and see bare steel on your rotor. So at this point, we're ready to put the wheel back on, torque those lug nuts back down to 140 foot-pounds for this particular model, and then we'll give it a test drive. All right, guys, if we zoom in here, where the pick is, you can see our new wear indicator right there. So you can see we got quite a bit of distance between that and the rotor with these new pads. All right, we're just going to give one more wipe down in case we got any grubby fingerprints on anything. And then I'm just turning this guy around, and you're going to hear the pads, but I want to make sure that there's no metal to metal contact. We would see a scrape in this paint to let us know if we had that problem. Just making sure. We're going to get behind on the other side with a mirror and do the same thing. All right, guys, before we put the wheel on, just want to put a little bit of fluid film on here so we don't get any corrosion from the wheel and the hub. All right, we got this job done just in time before a big storm came through. So after the storm passed, we did our test drive. If we take a look inside the wheel slot opening here, like I was mentioning, you can see that paint start to get worn off as the pads start to get broke in. Now, all we did was just a quick run around the parking lot here. We'll go ahead and give it a longer drive today, but I'm sure that we're in good shape. Everything is looking good. Nothing amiss here. So I hope this video helped you out. If you got comments or questions about what we did or the part numbers we used, go ahead and leave that below. I'll try to help. If you found this useful and it helps you do the job yourself and save you some money, pay it forward. Hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.